about what's happening in Georgia, because a whole bunch of questions have come in about this now. There have been a number of pretty prominent Republicans that have looked at the idea of removing the DA and all of that stuff and just been like, no. Kemp, the governor, of course, is one. And you have a number of others. I think the other highest profile would be the Speaker of the State House there. Kind of put out this message, and it was basically, he has the presumption of innocence, needs to play out in the courts, paraphrasing, of course. And certainly seems to be siding with Kemp on this. A bunch of questions have come in basically asking, wait, are all Georgia Republicans like Kemp? Meaning, do they have that ideology? Or are they making their move on principle? You can't say that. Doesn't mean that it's not true, but you can't infer that from this. You have to look at it at the point in time when it happened. When Kemp did what he did, he was basically looking at what he believed the Constitution and the law required of him. And that's what he did. That is what he did. He didn't know how that was going to play out for him politically at the time. When he made the choices that he made, he didn't know what was going to happen politically. Same thing with Raffensperger. Didn't know. They did what they thought was right. Because they were acting with that huge unknown variable out there, you can infer a little bit about how they look at things. You may not agree with them on policy. I certainly don't. But they, you have to acknowledge that when it comes to certain things, they are going to follow what they believe the law and the Constitution demands. Because that's what happened. Regardless of anything else, you can't take that away from them. Is that true of the people today? The people who are making those moves today? Not really. With the people who are showing up now, it's way simpler than you might be making it. You have to assume two things. One, that anybody in office today who's making this kind of move, well, they won their election. That's a pretty safe assumption. The other is that Trump lost Georgia. What you have are a bunch of politicians who are refusing to tie themselves to a candidate who their voters rejected. That's it. You can't infer anything beyond that. In this case, it's good politics. You can't look at it and say, oh, they're doing it because they believe in mom, apple pie, and the American way, or whatever. In this case, that unknown, it's not unknown anymore. It isn't unknown. The voters who put them in office voted for them, and they didn't vote for Trump. Not in enough numbers for him to win. So, it is a wise political decision for them to be like, no, I'm not tying myself to this person. You can't infer anything beyond that. It's funny, y'all always, in the comments, y'all always accuse me of giving people the benefit of the doubt when they don't deserve it. Yeah, some of y'all need to read some Hunter S. Thompson and become a little bit more cynical. This is just good politics. There doesn't have to be anything more to it. Now, some of them, they very well may look at this and just be like, no, this is wrong. This is what the law and the Constitution demand, and I'm going to do that. But you can't prove that based on these actions. Georgia just isn't that into Trump. So a Republican politician refusing to back Trump to an extreme level, it just makes sense politically. doesn't have to have anything to do with ideology. It doesn't preclude ideology from being involved in it. But it isn't a guarantee. It's not like with Kemp. When all of that was going on, they didn't know how that was going to play out, and they didn't know how the voters would react to them. They do now. I mean, it's really that simple. It's just good political math. I wouldn't read too much into this. But that doesn't, just because you have a bunch of prominent Republicans saying, no, don't do this, it doesn't necessarily mean that the other Republicans, those who have tied themselves to Trump, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going to try. And that would spark all kinds of division within the Republican Party, because those who are, let's just say, long-term thinkers when it comes to politics, they're not going to do it. They're not going to tie themselves to Trump. Those who are or have been in the past so tied to Trump that they can't untie themselves, well, they really don't have a choice. So just because of the actions of these prominent Republicans, you can't get rid of the idea that this still might happen, that they still might try to oust that DA. We'll just have to wait and see. Anyway, it's just a thought. Y'all have a good day.
Hello and welcome to the 538 Politics Podcast. I'm Galen Druk. Former President Trump has been indicted for a fourth time, now in Fulton County, for efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 election in Georgia. While the alleged crimes in this case relate to his federal indictment and special counsel Jack Smith's investigation, there are important differences. First, these are state crimes, based in part on Georgia's racketeering laws, which have historically been applied much more broadly than federal racketeering laws. Second, and relatedly, there's an alleged criminal enterprise at the core of this case, which resulted in the indictment of 18 other people also involved in some way in trying to overturn the results of the 2020 election. That group includes names like Rudy Giuliani, Mark Meadows, Sidney Powell, and other names you might remember from the months following the 2020 election, and some folks you've probably never heard of before. Third, thinking about a possible Trump second term, these being state crimes, the president has no pardon power or power to make the case go away. Also, unlike in the other cases so far, Georgia allows its court proceedings to be televised. So if you're thinking about how the public might process all of this, perhaps that holds some significance. There's more to get into, and we're going to dig into it right now with a group of Georgia legal experts. Here with me are Professor of Law and Associate Dean of Research at Emory University, Kay Levine. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Also joining us is attorney Christopher Timmons at Knowles Gallant Timmons, who specializes in Georgia's racketeering law. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Galen. Good to be here.
And also here with us is Anthony Michael Christ, Professor of Law at Georgia State University. Welcome.
Glad to be here.
All right, so we have assembled three of the brightest Georgia legal minds on the podcast this morning to really try to untangle all of this. Because there's a lot going on. I mean, this was a nearly 100-page indictment. So we're going to try to make sense of it all together. And first, I just want to say, I think there's a good chance that at this point, Trump's now 4 indictments are melding together in Americans' minds. I mentioned a few things at the top that make this a little bit different. But when we are trying to differentiate sort of what makes this 4th indictment unique, Kay, kick us off. What did I leave out? What are some other things we should think about here?
So I would say the similarity between this case and Jack Smith's most recent indictment of the former president for election interference, the similarity between those two cases is really the greatest. There is no, as far as I can tell, no similarity between this and the Mar-a-Lago documents case or the case brought by the New York Attorney General for the business practices there. So the similarities really are between those two cases. What I see when I look at both indictments is the Fulton County indictment is far more granular in terms of the specifics that it gives about every email every tweet, every text, every meeting, every phone call, and not just those that were initiated by the former president, but sometimes it's an email between person A and person B discussing something or attaching a memo or suggesting a strategy, or person X going to pick up person Y at the airport in order to bring person Y into Fulton for the purpose of doing something nefarious connected to the scheme. So compared to the federal indictment, this one has a lot of detail. I think it's one of the reasons that it goes on for so many pages. Even count one, which is the main RICO count, has 160 something acts that are alleged to be in furtherance of that main conspiracy. It goes on for 71 pages. So that level of detail is really stunning. And for people like myself who followed, as a resident of Georgia, and a resident of Atlanta, I knew some of these things at the time that they were happening, but I don't think I had any idea the level of involvement, the number of people who were involved, and just how many things were going on behind the scenes. We all knew about the phone call to Brad Raffensperger because it was publicized almost as soon as it was happening. We knew about the fake electors scheme, but so many of the other details were really hidden from public view, and that I think is one of the great benefits of this grand jury process is just how much was brought to light publicly. And we'll see more of that, of course, once the case goes to trial, but the level of detail, the number of co-conspirators who were named personally, really means that this feels like a very different charging document than what we saw in the federal case.
Yeah, Anthony, get in here. How are you thinking about the differences?
Okay, so the whole story about Hansel and Gretel and the breadcrumbs being
Never
left
heard of it.
everywhere, right? But that's like this is the Hansel and Gretel kind of crime syndicate, right? Just leaving evidence everywhere, sloppy as can be. And I mean, I think for those of us who watch a lot of this unfold in real time, there was a sense that it was really sloppy, and it was a sense that people were just doing whatever they wanted, however they wanted, and there was just no sense of repercussions, in the works that would make them restrain themselves in some kind of way. But it is, I think, really shocking, the granular detail, like Professor Levine said, the detail that's laid out. I've always seen this as a subset of Jack Smith's case, right? Jack Smith had the big, large, Section 241 conspiracy to deprive civil rights case. As an election law of democracy, common law person, that's the stuff that really got me energized. And I thought, oh, wow, that's really great. And Fani Willis is going to just bore into the Georgia aspect of things and be done. That's just not what happened. I mean, she really tried, I think, in this document to do two things. Show, one, how a national criminal enterprise, a national conspiracy was formed, and how Georgia was disproportionately targeted and Georgians were disproportionately harmed by that enterprise and our laws violated. And then two, I think the narrative and all the detail in it is really meant to communicate something about this being essential for the preservation, the health, and the promotion of democracy. Like she's got to explain to people, right, why she's doing this, because this is not a run-of-the-mill case. And I think she is communicating, not in a direct way, but she's winking and nodding to the idea that our democracy needs some I don't want to say saving, but our democracy requires some accountability for what happened here in 2020.
So, I mean, I think the biggest thing is that you've got a RICO Act charge, which you can't have nationally because they don't have continuity. So there's a requirement on national RICO that the scheme lasts. It's kind of up in the air depending on the court, but at least 12 months or have the possibility of lasting longer. And here, this was a much shorter scheme, but you can use that under the Georgia RICO Act. I think one of the big things, and I've tried, I think at least 7 RICO cases at this point. One of the nice things about using RICO is that the level of evidence that you can use in a RICO case is much broader than you can use in another case, because anything that anyone did in furtherance of the conspiracy is relevant to the case, as opposed to when you've got individual indictments, you can really only talk about what individual defendants are up to. The other thing that you'll see in this indictment that's different than the federal indictment is you've got a number of what we refer to as acts in furtherance of the conspiracy, which aren't actual crimes. I believe it's number 56 paragraph in there where they talk about David Schaefer having reserved a room at the state capitol. That's not a crime unless it's an act in furtherance of the conspiracy, which it was here, which is an act that ties him back to the conspiracy. It's the same thing like as an armed robbery. It's not a crime to buy a gun. It's not a crime to rent a car. But if you buy that gun and hand it to somebody to commit an armed robbery, or you rent that car as the getaway vehicle for the armed robbery, then you've committed a criminal act, the criminal act being conspiracy. And so that's probably the big difference, is you've got RICO here, which is a complete game changer.
So yeah, as I mentioned in the intro, Georgia's RICO laws, their racketeering laws, are significantly different from federal laws, which makes this whole case basically possible. I've also heard on top of that, some perhaps early criticisms of the approach that Fani Willis is taking here, that it's really like charge absolutely everything possible, charge everyone possible. It's extremely broad. It's throwing the whole book and sort of seeing what sticks. And that may, for people who think that...
Ugh, yuck. Who is this guy? The road comes true. The road comes through. The road comes true. The road comes true. Under the sun, we are a kindness come. Be one are a kindness come